Right. So Karen Thorpe-Reid, as Akil said, today we're looking at writing a winning proposal. And I think some of the key things that we're going to kind of focus on are some of the practical tips and tricks in order for you to write a winning proposal, because that's ultimately what you need to know. I can speak from my perspective. I've been involved in bids that have been plus 2 million. I've also managed teams who've had budgets of well over £1 billion as well. So just some really big sort of corporate organisations. And with every bid, whether or not it's big or small, they all pretty much have the same and similar components. And that's what's thing that's really important to understand when you're actually writing things. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me, just so that it kind of gives you some context as to why should I be in a position to kind of share this knowledge, and why should you actually listen to anything that I've got to say. It's always an important one. So just a little of my background. I started off in the sort of customer services arena, just in a call centre, taking calls. When I was probably when I was at university, sort of 18, 19, dropped out of university. By the time I was 26 years old, I was a director on the board of a large oil company managing 20 islands in the Caribbean. So my background has started quite long in the game in terms of transformation and building both businesses, companies, organisations. I was an interim for many years, consulting. I developed part of the London contactless system, so the strategy behind what you see today in terms of when you go onto your buses and use the Oyster card. I did the very first integration of Oyster card and Barclaycard way back when in 2006. And in the background was one of the people sort of helping to pull together the strategy for contactless London. And interestingly, I don't live in London anymore. I now live in the Shires. But when I come into London and I see the way that people are navigating and using our transport systems, you'd never know that I had anything to do with it way back when. But it's really interesting to see those sort of things evolve. I've gone on then to bid for contracts and various different things through Network Rail, right through to NATS, and we've done some really big bids there. I think from one of my personal companies, 1.8 million has been our largest individual bid that we've also secured. Also on the NHS framework, so we also deliver services to NHS. I have currently 4 active businesses. I always have to remember because, they're always opening and closing, various different things. And my primary one is Premier Change Consulting. And what we do is business transformation. So we help develop operating models for organizations. We do project program management, but we also specialize in my specialist areas, behavioral change. So you can have some of the biggest technologies in the world, but if you don't actually have people using them, you're never going to realize your business case. And if you don't have them using them the right way, you also won't actually manage your business case. So I have got quite a breadth of kind of experience in terms of various different areas. So please remember today is about you and your session and what you need to get out of it. And one of the first things I'm going to ask you to do is to think about what's important for you today to get out of the 90 minutes or 2 hours we have together. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. You've got post-it notes there. If you can write on those for me. And what I'll try and do as best as I can is to try and respond to that as I go through the course today. Does that work well for you? Good. Okay. Couple of minutes, post-it note. What would you like to get out of the next 90 minutes to 2 hours? So one of the things that's really important to know is how much and what kind of bids are out there and available to you. There are, believe it or not, billions of pounds worth of bids that are available for you to actually tender for. A lot of the time people don't know where to access them or how to go about doing that. And there are a number of various different ways of accessing those things. So I'm just going to show you a little bit in terms of just a snapshot of what's out there at the moment. So you've got £73.6 billion worth of contracts available in the health and social services. Construction work, 112 billion. Business services, 36.1 billion. Architectural, construction, engineering, 29.4. Medical, 44.8. IT services, 15.5. And transport, you've got 22.8. And some repairs and stuff, 24.6. Now, that doesn't necessarily constitute every category, but it lets you know the volume of stuff that's out there. Now, a lot of the time you can access them through a variety of different ways. Some of the things that we get are because we are on frameworks. So you can actually apply to be part of a framework. And when you apply to become part of a framework, there are a lot of components and constituents that people will start to look at. So some of the key things that you need to make sure that your credit worthiness is up there. So you as a personal individual, especially if you've got a small business, your credit worthiness is equally as important as the credit worthiness of your business, because it is a small company, so they are going to look at you as the director. So that's one of the things that's really important. Secondly, when you are looking at, accessing some of these things, you can find them on Contracts Finder. So the government site of Contracts Finder will have them. You can have alerts that can be set up for you to access them as well. Make sure you've got the keywords based on your type of business or things that you're interested in. They bless you, believe it or not, one of the things, it's not the most sophisticated, and what we've built with our stuff to make sure that we can access the right things is we have started to filter them in a way that and group them for people so that they can actually extract them. We do that as a free service on our site as well, so that you can start to build that. And also you can actually start to access different resources, different team members who you might want to build your team. How many of you here are a one-man band? Yeah? Okay. And so as a one-man band, you are your finance manager, you are the MD, you are, the bottle washer, you're everything. Sales, but everything. And so sometimes people don't have the luxury also of having, sort of a whole team to build components of your bids. And that's going to be quite an important thing. So we find that, when we look at, the size of the prize, as we call it, you have to have some really, really good key skills in terms of developing and responding to these things. And first of all, when you look at a bid, understand, is it something that an SME can actually apply for? So when you do your searches through, you might say, oh my God, I could do that. But you have to check and see whether or not the organization will actually permit an SME to answer, to respond to that. If it says that it's not an SME, but you can think, you've got the skill, and maybe there are a couple of you, then there's an opportunity to look for kind of a consortium in which you then work with someone else who's got maybe the broader skill or the longer experience in the area, and allows you to kind of be part of that. That's a whole, probably another course sort of taking you through how to work within a consortium, but it is just to say that if you're finding it hard to find the right contracts based on your skills, there are still opportunities for you to be able to do some collaborations around things and maybe somebody lead, but you still are able to be part of that proposal as well. Any questions around this particular area? No? Okay, so a framework quite often is something that you have to apply. Again, almost you have to go through the whole proposal process, and then you become a part of a framework, which means you become a preferred supplier. And as a preferred supplier, there are different situations within there. So depending on the type of framework that you're on, a preferred supplier can actually just be approached and say, we have a project. Can you start this project? Can you provide the resources? Can you deliver? So because you've already gone through the process of becoming, so they don't have to actually go back out to market because you're part of that framework. Second way of things that they will do is actually maybe select 2 or 3, and then you do a small mini bid within that, but you don't have to go through the whole process that you had to before in terms of, you know, proving, you know, your references, what you've done before, etc. It might be just a small thing in which they just ask you to demonstrate how you would go about delivering the project for them. That answer your question? Yeah. Now, in terms of where can you get onto frameworks? So, for instance, there's a lot around apprenticeships. So if you can deliver particular services that can support apprentices, then there's a lot of frameworks, a lot of government frameworks around at the moment that you can get on. Or there are frameworks in which people are subcontracting to smaller businesses to be able to provide something specific on those frameworks again. I'll give you an example. On the NHS framework that we're on, they had various different lots. So you have different lots within a particular framework, and we had training, there was change management, there was HR, so a variety of different things on there, and you may on that framework only be able to apply for a specific lot. You might do multiple lots, and again you then have to be able to show relevant references or experiences around that. I think one of the other things is, as a new startup business or small business, sometimes we don't have as many references possibly as some of the bigger companies that come in. People suffer from that? Okay, so how do we go about doing that? You know, how do we change that? How do we articulate who we are around that space? So when I first opened my business in 2014, I didn't have the references that could say I'd done these for large companies as my existing business. But I was able to demonstrate how I had helped different companies as an individual, so as the lead. But it's being able to pick out the correct components and articulating them that meets the brief. Believe it or not, so people will take the chance on you. I'll explain to you one of the biggest opportunities that I had. When we were bidding for something, I think it was about $500,000. And to be honest with you, I got a call on a Friday, and I'd been referred. Someone said, your company's been referred to us. We've already gone through most of the process of the shortlisting. However, we'd like to give you the opportunity to put in a bid for this. So Friday evening, it's got to be in by Monday. And, we want to give you that opportunity. Are you interested? Of course I'm interested, right? Yeah. So I was like, yes, okay, it's fine. And, so whole weekend going through this. And at that particular point in time, I didn't even have the team in place. I have an associate model. That's one of the things I do. So I have an associate model in which I have 215 now in terms of a pool of people that I can pull from for particular projects. And that's one of the things that's really key, building up your network, having trusted people who are prepared and have got the right skills to be able to represent your brand, because you are your brand, right? Every time that anyone goes out, they represent you. So every associate that I have, so I haven't onboarded them all in one day, but I have been part of their onboarding process so that they understand how I operate, they understand the culture of the organization, and they know what our differentiating factors are. So it's very key and clear, and everyone at any given time can always contact me if there's anything. And, so we have a very, very flexible model. So I had to spend that weekend identifying the right people who could potentially work on this project with the right skills, and draw them in to be able to put them onto a proposal. So one of the things about proposals now, which is different to sort of really in the early days, a lot of proposals are asking you to identify your team up front and also have their images ready. So a lot of people before could bid and then look for the team afterwards. But you now have to make sure you've got the team in place. And I recognize that was a challenge and an issue, and hence my second business came out of the result of that challenge for myself, in which we've now built a company in which we provide that. So you can actually get someone who's got the right skills, that's been verified, etc., and put them in your bid as part of your proposal. You know, the big companies, can do that because they've got really big resources, so they can draw different people off different projects. But as small businesses, we often find that, we have a bigger struggle in that. We can do a lot of the skills, but if we're looking for a team that might have 5 or 6, it's going to take us a little while to draw in those resources. So making sure you build yourself a good associate pool is really important as well. So if you can start that journey even before you need to use them, it makes sense, so that you're not in that position of panic of where you then have to think, oh gosh, the bid's got to be in a week. I've got to find 5 people with these additional skills to be part of my bid. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it's really important. Good question. Really good question. I've got it wrong before. I got it wrong in the early days. I got it wrong. I remember I had someone who did recruitment, who was part of my network, who put forward 3 different CVs for me for a particular role. And one of them, I interviewed her, met her, etc., and she was perfect. She showed me a portfolio. It was perfect. Well done. So based on me speaking with her, seeing what she'd done, I put her onto the project. I think 3 weeks into the project, I realized that she had probably about 10% of the skills that she had put forward. And I found out, because I didn't reference her, because she showed me the work, she was able to explain to me what was in that work, but she'd taken someone else's work and brought it forward. And there was 2 ways of me finding that out. So one was by the fact that I'm looking at, because I QA all the work, I'm seeing what she's giving me, and it isn't what I'm going to put in front of my client. That was one way. And then secondly, because the team, I was continuing to build the team, and one guy who really wanted to be on the project and had worked at the same place as her. And when my recruitment person said, oh, we have someone on board who worked for, and her name is X, he said, well, if you're recruiting people like that, I don't want to work with you. So that's your second sign. So one of the things that I will always do is warts and all, so to let you know that I haven't always got it right. So I think the key things in terms of when you are recruiting people or looking for things is, one, LinkedIn is a good environment to look at. If you see someone and you think, right, this is a good person, seems to have the right skills, spoken to them, have a look at that network, see if they've got anyone you've got in common who you can ask in confidence about their experiences there. Make sure you get references or use a company who does that kind of verification. It is probably one of your best investments that you will make because of the potential impact and harm it can do to you as your brand or you as your company. So it's really important that you do that. Yeah, so one of the things that I always put in is my contingency workforce. So what you do is, this is how you beat the system, really, is you can put forward those individuals. So, if it's like a team of 5 and you put forward those 5, and even if those 5 are not available at that point in time for you, but they are part of your network, you add in a line into your thing that says that, at any given time, you have got replacement resources for those if anything happens. And that is kind of almost your get out clause. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's an important thing to do. So if you add that in, because even when you do your contracts after you've secured the role, you must also include that in as well, because you never know what's going to happen. I've again been in those situations if, someone's been ill or someone decides to take a permanent role somewhere else and leaves you in the middle. You can't just have it that your project can only be delivered by that named individual. just say, you know, this is your A team that's been selected to deliver this, or this is the team that's been selected to deliver this. And if you are going to change it, then you just have that conversation with the client and be very clear on this and say that due to unforeseen circumstances, this person has had to roll up, but I've got this person with equally as much experience, etc., that's able to go on. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's the way to kind of navigate and get around those things, because otherwise you will stutter through it. So some of the key things to take into consideration here when you're looking at your proposal and bid. Now, usually what comes through are probably about 3 or 4 various different documents. So you'll have one which is compliance, which will ask you some of the kind of real sort of housekeeping things. You know, what's the name of your business? What's your business codes? You know, all of those kind of things they'll ask you about. They'll also want to make sure that they've got your latest accounts, if those are available. Sometimes they'll ask you to submit them. Other times it's just for you to self-verify that you're not going to be bankrupt or aren't bankrupt at this point in time. They will also, one of the things that's becomes more increasingly, depends on the type of project that you are, they will ask you about your company policies. And a lot of time, us as small businesses, we don't necessarily have formal policies in place, but they will ask you about your D&I policy. They might ask you about particular processes within your system. Have you got them documented? Now, you don't have to be sort of IS 9000 sort of accredited, but there are some simple things that you should have in place. So having things like an HR policy in place, which are, you know, you can either just, you know, sort of buy one off the internet or so, or, you know, find something that just kind of gives some really standard things. Things like modern slavery, etc., having those sort of things on your website, privacy, modern slavery, so you know, the sort of policies on your website and things like that, making sure that you've got privacy policies, all of those simple things that need to be in place. Cybersecurity is a big one now, especially if you are going to be dealing with anyone's data. You're also going to have to make sure that you've got those ICO stuff in place, which means that you have a dedicated officer. It could just be you that's a dedicated officer, but you just need to be able to declare it and understand what that means. So have those, doesn't have to be complicated. No one's asking for it to be complicated, but it's the things that if you've got them done in advance, it means that when you start doing your proposals, you're not panicking and thinking, I've now got to create myself an HR policy. I've got to create myself a D&I policy. I've got what? So if you have them, you pretty much use the same ones for every proposal going forward. And it's not that they will always ask you for you to submit them at the first stage, but they will say, if we ask for them, we would expect to be able to get them from you. So those kind of some of the key things there. So what are we doing when we get the proposal? We've got all those various different documents. As I said, the first one's a compliance one. The second one will probably be the actual bid itself in terms of the response. So it will have a clear sort of brief. What are we trying to achieve? What's happening? What's the backstory behind this? What do we need from you? Sometimes it's not always clear what they actually need from you. And one of the things, and we'll go through this in detail, but they have opportunities for you to ask questions. And there's often sort of regular, depends on, you know, sort of the companies that you're applying to, where they have kind of a portal, and then we'll have various different people asking questions, so you can see similar questions that you might be asking or thinking about or of concern that are raised already, but you also have the opportunity to do that either through a dedicated email address or through the portal itself. So when you start off looking through your bid, make sure that you highlight the key things that they're asking you for. Do that as your first thing. So read through it. I would always say read through it a couple of times and then highlight those. If you have got a team in which there is, you know, various different skills within the team, get them to focus on the specific components of the bid. If it's you that has to do absolutely everything, then just kind of make sure that as you're looking through them, you're looking through them with the different hats that you have to operate with. Yeah. Again, as I said, if you're sure of anything, you should ask a question, and you can do that through those different forums. So there was an interesting one about not asking for extensions. There are certain ones who will not extend. So I don't want to give you a false sense of security that you can always extend. There will be some, especially within the government arenas, in which they are, they've got set deadlines and set protocols or processes, and anyone that's outside of that will not, that it will be discarded. I created one of the frameworks for Network Rail. I did the change and transformation one there. So know all the kind of grading and what they look for, and how you articulate things. It's quite an interesting way in terms of the way that people actually review and mark things and go through them. So just have a think about whether or not, I mean, it's worth asking, but it's just to say that don't use that as your kind of get out clause, that you think that you possibly get an extension, because that's often not necessarily the case. Follow the instructions for submission. I've seen people send stuff through on email that had to go through the portal, and after the spending a couple of weeks or months or whatever developing a bid and it being disregarded, you have to use what they tell you to use. Sometimes the reason for that is about making sure, from a process perspective, that it is seen in the order that they need it to be seen. So it's compliance more so than anything else, because I've seen local authorities, especially, in those situations in which they've been sued by someone because, someone else hasn't followed the process, or something has happened within there, haven't been able to give a feedback, whatever the case may be, and they just want to make sure that they're doing it in the right way. Work collaboratively with others to spread the load. So again, as I said, so if you have got either people within your teams that you can work with together, or you can find you've got someone else who's got a similar business, types of things at which you can actually get some help and support from, that's great. Funders will always give you clues as to what they want to hear from you and how they want you to answer the question. That's always an interesting one. Having your processes and systems, some nice little graphs, and things that they can see that are repeatable that you've done before are really important. I think I've got lots of different frameworks in terms and frameworks I'm using in a different way, in which we deliver particular services. So, if you think about project management, and in project management, you've got Prince2, you've got MSP. So there are types of methodologies that are used. You have to think about your methodology that you use to deliver what you do. So in your head, you might know there are 5 steps that you take. Try and put that down into a diagram. And that diagram then is something that you can use in all of your bids, because you can then demonstrate this is a repeatable process that we do in my company and we feel confident with it. Call it something. You might have a name for it. That's fine. Create a name for it. Gives it even more credibility, trust me. The other thing is being succinct. Anyone here sort of, we've probably all been to school, so I'm not going to say we've been. When you think about when you go into an exam, how many times have we gone into exam and said, and we've done some revision overnight, and we've revised a particular bit, it doesn't come up in the exam, but because we revised that last night, we're going to put it in, yeah? Because it deserves to be in there, doesn't it? It deserves to be in there. So it means we've got a waffle, haven't we? We've got a waffle on that's gone completely on the other tangent. I remember doing that very much as, when I was first sort of doing my degree, I've revised that, so that's what needs to be there. Be succinct. Get to the point. Remember, for some of these proposals or some of these bids, they might be reviewing 100 bids. And if yours, sort of really kind of takes them off on a tangent, the likelihood of them absorbing and wanting to keep reading yours is probably less. you know, than anyone else's. Be specific and give examples when you can. So again, as I explained to you before, even if it isn't you as your company today, but you have delivered a project similar through either your permanent work or some collaboration you did with someone else, be able to explain clearly what your role was within there. The other thing is they do take up references. So make sure that it's credible. Don't get caught out in a lie. Tell the truth. So think about what part you played within there. And definitely don't do something or put a reference in where you know that actually there's no one can actually go to that person or get anything from them, because then you get disqualified for that. So just kind of think about those things. So try and ask your referees before you make before you put them in as a reference. So maybe have 2 or 3 people already lined up who you have a kind of pre-agreement. I'll be doing a number of different proposals and bids. So therefore, would you be comfortable being my referee? The same way as you would do for a job. You might have 2 or 3 people who you are your go-to people, but they need to be able to speak confidently about you in that particular arena. And the last one is, so just an example here, when we talk about highlighting what the key things are. So, some of the phrases we've got here: develop, run. So can you do both? Those are the key things there that we're asking for. We're also looking about education. Do you have an experience around Windrush? So, what's your relevance? Where do you get that from? Being able to draw from those particular things. So you can use then the question to formulate your structure for your answer, so that you're kind of thinking. So the first thing you might say is, we have developed based on, and we developed it in this company, that company, but today I'm giving you an example in specific area. So you don't have to show every single company or every single experience that you've developed something in, but you have to be able to at least be clear. So sometimes we might use just 2 things, 2 particular sort of case studies all the way through, so that you can show how you did something from end to end, because that's also quite a good one. If you can show how you started something, but also how the benefits were realized at the end of it as well. So separate out key information that is essential. So this, when it says this project must focus on the Windrush versus the descriptors celebrate, commemorate, you need to expand your answer. So you need to kind of think about all of the components that sit within there, so you're able to articulate those quite clearly. Any questions on this before I move on? We say, if you're unsure of anything, ask. Really important. Often you'll have kind of your key contact, the persons that you can do some clarifications on, and they're happy to answer those questions for you. Again, as I said to you, there will be portals. The other thing that you can do is do a search. At the beginning, we were asking about where can you find bids. You can sometimes go into individual portals as well. So you can go to your local authorities portal. So you might just go and, if you're in Westminster, you go onto the website and just have a quick look through for bids and tenders, and it'll take you to their portal. You could sign up to their portals. You might get alerts directly from them as well as on the contracts one. Then it probably will do the filter a bit better on those as well if you do them on the specifics. So those are some of the other areas in terms of doing things. And when you ask questions, because sometimes what happens is bids and proposals or the RFPs are written or can be a duplicate of something that's been put out before, and the information actually doesn't make any sense and it's not actually relevant for that. And you end up doing a whole set of work that isn't relevant for that. So if you see something, once you've read it through and it doesn't make sense, ask a question. Or if there's something that they've made a reference to and then you look and there's no document there, ask them where it is. How many times we've had to do that is unbelievable in terms of the replicas of things and inaccuracies. So, ask if there's anything that's unclear on any of the RFPs. We said there's usually a place where all bid questions from the potential supplier are listed. Read those as well, because people will often ask very similar questions or have the same sort of thoughts as you. So the clarification's there. They don't usually appreciate you asking the same question that's already on there, so do that. Some of them allow you to have alerts so that you can then, they'll just come through to you so you'll know a new question's been asked on a particular thing, and then you're able to kind of respond to that. This one I challenged on this, but I'm going to let me hear your story.
Good writing can cause a lot of stress. Sometimes you might be under significant pressure, and my rule is tell the truth. Always, no matter how hard. So what happens is sometimes, for this specific reason, I was having a panic attack. Life was really overwhelming. This was about a year and a half ago. And I just wrote them an email and said, hey, I can't do this. I cannot deliver a high quality bid for you right now. Got everything to offer, I just can't do it. And so I told the truth. And they gave me an extension. They gave everyone an extension. And that was it. And I got to put opportunity to put my best foot forward, and I won it. I did.
My challenge on that is that not what I said to everyone at the beginning, was it? That don't use that as your fallback.
Never use that.
Don't use it as your fallback. Yeah. And I also said the other thing is that you can, if you've only got a couple of days and you're just starting it, have a think about whether or not it's worth you putting yourself through that stress, as you say, in the first place. It really just does depend. Poor Akil has done some bids writing for me in his early days of, as he mentioned, and the immense pressure, I'm a nightmare, to say the least. And, you know, I scrutinize everything, like, you know, and you could see he was working really hard on it. And, but he took it. I have to say, he took it really well. And, you know, he's written his own sort of £800,000 bids now as well. So he was part of our team that did the NHS framework as well. And I know that was a big learning curve for him from that perspective. But it just goes to show that once you keep going, you'll get better at it. And the other thing about proposals is getting into a place in which you start to have your own templates. Templates are your best friend. Trust me. Trust me. Remember I said to you, if you create your method, have your documented method. Once you've got that, when you write your bids, it becomes so much easier. The challenge, I think, you know, depending on the type, for us, we have lots of methods. So it's taken a long time for us to build up sort of our portfolios. But if you have something that's kind of, this is my clear skill that we deliver, and we always use this. So, you know, if you've got a business that cooks a particular thing, you'll know that the recipe is always going to be A to B to C to D, and that's never going to change. So you'll have that. But also make sure then that you tailor the responses, though, to the specific bid. So you've got the method, but you then think about, well, how would we apply that method for this particular project? Yeah. So I said to you about following instructions for submission. So what do we mean by that? Stick to the structure you've been given, word count. I'll tell you what, when we used to review the stuff at Network Rail, you know, we would take it down, and if it says 1,000 words, anything after 1,000 we didn't read. So we would highlight it. Oh, no, you're checking, yeah, we would highlight it. So that's just to say all of that extra work that you've done means nothing. For some companies, they will just completely disqualify you because you've exceeded it. So stick to your word count. Make sure your page limits, and also the formats. You know, I love a PowerPoint. I get really upset when they want me to do it in Word. But sometimes that's what we have to do, because that's how they review it. Yeah. If they give you the option to add links, etc., that's great. So if you've got, make sure that on your website, even if it's hidden from the outside world, you might have created some links or create some pages so that you just make it live for the particular time for the bids, etc. That's also a really good way of doing things, because then that really professionalizes stuff. So you have something that says, here's our case studies. This is who we are. This is what we do. So we've created all our case studies. Our case studies are all on the website. So they can always be pulled off at any given time. So nicely formatted, great graphics, all that sort of stuff looks fantastic. It's taken us a while, obviously, to do that. But the other thing is, as you do every project that you do, everything that you're involved in, try your best to create a case study for it. And it doesn't have to be, you know, lots and lots of pages. It could be just a one-pager, but have your method in terms of creating that case study. So it could be, this is what the customer's brief was, or this is what I was asked to do. This is the challenge that the organization individual had. This is how we went about doing it. This is the team that was involved in delivering it. And this was the benefit to the customer as a result of it. That makes sense? Or organization, or whatever it is, or to the community, however that is. But be very clear in having those very, very simple steps to enable you to do that. And you can throw in a few images here and there. So every time you do a project as well, if possible, or whatever you're working with him, if you could ask the client, is it okay for me to take a photo or an image? It says 1,000 words rather than you taking from the stock images. If you can do that, you can actually say from client site or whatever the case may be. Again, when you are leaving an organization or client, customers you've worked with, get them to give you some feedback. Again, being able to add quotes from your customers or clients, etc., is invaluable. And again, ask them, is it okay if we use your name, etc., or is it okay if we can use the company's name, or whatever the case may be. Some of our best projects, unfortunately, we've not been able to share in that way because we've got NDAs with them. Everyone know what NDA is? Yeah, so sometimes we've got an NDA, could be on for a long, because it's particularly sensitive. Some of our, you know, sort of central government clients, etc., we can kind of talk a bit around it, but can't actually say who they were, or whatever the case may be, or how much money they've spent, or how much we've saved for them, or whatever the case may be. Again, you know, we talked about, you know, being succinct. If you can be very clear, again, think about the structure of how you respond, making sure that that is really answering the question that's been asked, because that, again, that's the way the kind of the scoring works in that space. Okay, so everyone ready? Yep, we're good. So one of the things we were talking about before is about spreading that load. Sometimes that's not feasible because we are, as we say, a one-man band, or there's only a couple of us. But it is about playing to your strengths and pulling in resources when you need to. So I would always say, depending on the value of the bid that you're putting in and the quality that you need to produce, if there are some areas that for the first time you haven't had the experience in doing, then, you know, whether or not you get some mentorship around it to help you with developing certain aspects. You look at, you know, sort of previous bids that have been put in through other companies, whatever the case may be, if you can get access to things like that, so that you can see how things are written. If you're not strong on the financial sides of things, you know, it could be an opportunity to pull in your accountant at that particular stage. You have some of those conversations. I was rubbish at numbers, I'll tell you, when I first started off on the whole thing. You know, my son was the one who whizzed up some Excel spreadsheets for me, which I use to this day. I actually use them in my day-to-day life as well as for the projects and things. So one of the things that you also, when you are creating kind of your budgets and you're looking at numbers and things, is to think about how much profit you need to make on what you're doing. So you're thinking about the cost to serve. Yeah? when you think about your cost to serve, you need to be considering really clearly on how much is it costing me to create, how much is it costing me in terms of any salaries that you might need to pay, any consultants that you need to pay, materials, all of those things have to be built in. Because sometimes we'll look at a price and say, okay, I'm putting in, you know, £200 a day or whatever the case may be. And then when you calculate it, you know, you're spending over £200. So, you know, you're not going to make any profit from it. There might be day rates that you're referring to that you'll have within something. As it stands now, I usually make about 40% on top of everything else. Started off probably making 5% initially. There's a whole course kind of we do on how to get the best rates and how to build your rates up to a stage. So when I sort of started off in the game, my rates were around £300 a day. I now put in sort of, you know, between 21 and 2,500 a day for my services. So how do you get from 300 to that? What's the journey? What does that look like? What's different about how I deliver services today than when I first went out? One part of it probably is because you don't actually know what your value is. Quite a lot of us, we don't know the value of our service or our product or whatever the case may be. And some of that comes down to us, you know, trial and error as we build in. But that's why it's important to understand, get your Excel spreadsheet and make sure that every element of your cost, you're able to actually, you know, do it line by line. So you're very clear on that. Looking at your competitors, etc., and looking at making sure in terms of balance. Some proposals, you'll see a percentage, which is based on your cost to them. So how much is it actually going to cost them? Some of it might only be 10%. So if it's only 10%, I would say if it's only 10%, go in with your big boy pants and put in the price that you really want to put in on this. Sometimes if it's like 50%, then you have to kind of look at that again and say, well, what's my margin going to be on there? I might not make a 40% on that one. I might have to go for 25% in order for it to probably, you know, rank in the top 3 and be considered as, you know, part of the shortlisting proposal part. So that's also really important when you're pulling those things together. But be clear about your costs. Be clear about how much profit you're going to make on each service, product, whatever the case may be. And some of the services you might have a larger margin than others. So again, just kind of be very clear about that. And as you say, building enough in there that when the good old tax man comes to take the corporation tax away from you, you've still got some money at the end of it as well. Because that's also some of the things that happens that you know, when you're pulling things together, especially you're paying other people. So, you know, especially, you know, we've got models in which, as I said, we've got the associates and you might be paying them a particular day rate out of that. And if your day rate for them is £300 a day and you put in then that you want to make sure that you then put them in at 500, remember when your corporation tax, they're going to come and whip away, you know, so you're 25 or 19%, whatever it is now. I forget because it kind of keeps going up and down depending, you know, where you are in the revenue streams. So you do need to take in consideration all of those things as you build that through. So here we've got, you know, sort of looking at reading your specification, mapping out your approach and references. So we talked a lot about that earlier on. Filling out any supporting details. So if there's anything else that's relevant and important, make sure you add those things in as well. And then sort of kind of completing the proposal. So best advice I can give is plan for the end, and that's absolutely correct. So, you know, making sure you give yourself enough time, as we were saying before, about building that out so that it is of quality. Rereading what you have written. The number of times that I've gone back over people's proposals and seeing replication through with exactly the same thing said in several different places which by then, of course, you know, the person reading your bid has gone to sleep. You know, there's no new information, nothing, you know, that you're bringing in. So make sure you reread it. Grammar is important. Make sure you do simple spell checks. You know, those are the things that make sure your figures are correct. You can't go back after you've underpinned yourself and said, you know, I meant to put in 400,000, not the 300,000. Do you think they're giving you an extra 100,000? I don't think so. So you've got to make sure that those things are right on spot. Make sure that your calculation, because if you don't know the detail, if your detail isn't clear, I don't want you working on a project for me, because your attention to detail is not great. So those are the things that are really, really important. This is the reason why we went to school, I think, so that we understand those flows and etc. So just be clear on those kind of things. And don't put any, as I said, don't put any information that you really isn't relevant or isn't important. So we talked about opportunities to work with others. Once you've mapped out your approach, you can assign sort of different parts of the proposals to different team members, showing your value. So one of the things that we do as well is something called a shared change purpose, which is a clear indication of what you do as an organization. So being very clear about that, and the challenge that you actually, you know, whether or not it's something within the community that you, or issues or something that you actually resolve. So there was a problem, you saw it, you identified it, your organization actually exists for that reason. And then second part of that then is the vision, the clear vision for the future. So you have to be able to articulate your vision, your purpose, what you do as an organization. And the third step is the key steps that you have in terms of actually delivering that. So being very specific about what that journey looks like. And that, again, gives a very, very clear idea of what that means. And you can kind of make sure, especially when you're doing, you know, you're applying for grants, etc., is to be clear about what benefits to the community or benefits to specific groups that your bid is actually going to address. And whether or not you do that both in demonstration of monetary terms, but also in terms of social impact as well. So it's kind of, you know, key things as well. You may well have known that already, but you know, that's that's something too I thought I, you know, share with you as well. Always have your team play to your strengths. So you know, if there are, again, if you have smaller teams and there are areas that you haven't worked within and you don't have a comms person, you don't have a finance person, sometimes some of the simple things, I mean, YouTube is your best friend, as my son would say. You know, I hated YouTube at one stage because it was always on it. And now I get it, because there is short snippets of information that you can get that can help you to kind of think about something in a different way that you hadn't thought about it before. Short courses, sometimes you're here today, quick 90 minutes or 2 hours, helps you kind of hone in a particular skill. Maybe someone else from your team, you draw and you send them off on something. You know, my guys, I put them all through some sales training. Yes, you know, I think I can, you know, sell ice to an Eskimo, and that's fine. But I didn't think I could teach them to sell. So I needed to make sure, because they've all got varying different skills. Like, you know, I did training on lots of other things, but the sales bit, I wanted them to go through a formal sales training, and I did that. So invest in your team to build the skills that you need. But if you can also outsource, or, you know, specific things, so, you know, you have your social media, you might outsource because you don't have either the time or the skill to do it, to deliver what you need to. I mean, everybody's probably all tried a bit of social media, and then you just aren't consistent. And consistency is what actually delivers on social media. It's not that one post that you did in 2019 that was fabulous. You know, you're really proud of yourself. Nobody's seen that since 2019. So, you know, you have to do that. So things like that are really, really important. And then review it. So remember I said to you about going back, reading it, making sure that it's very, very clear in terms of what's there and that there aren't any errors in your submission as well. Yeah, there's clues everywhere in all of the submissions as to what it is that they're looking for. But there are also, as I said to you, so quite a lot of times it can be erroneous with some of the things because it's based on a previous one. So seek your clarification, make sure that you get the right information that's there. You know, you play back their words to them, like the sound of their own words, terms of phrase, things that are relevant, etc. to them. Sometimes you'll find acronyms in there they'll throw in that are only relevant to them and you don't know what that is. Again, ask a question. What does that mean? You know, just want to get clarification as to what that specific acronym means. Most of you have probably either worked with or for organizations who might have an acronym that means one thing in one place and an acronym in another. Please don't make assumptions. You know, I've seen people see POC, they think it means people of color, it's actually point of chance, you know, so there's been all of those sort of things that have gone on, you know, so you've just got to be really, really clear and understand that language as well, so that you then play that back. So once you understand what that acronym means, you can then refer to it confidently within your response. Yeah, so that all makes sense in terms of doing things as well, and then going through things and understanding, well, what does that mean within that context and within that. Some of the questions to ask sometimes is if they're asking for a specific thing, you might say, you might ask a question and say, is there an existing one in place? Is this a replacement one or is this a new one? When you know something's being replaced, you might, you know, ask them, is it an end of life thing? So that's the reason why they're doing it, or does it, or is there an issue with how it works today? So you ask those kind of questions. If it's a new one, my brain goes straight into, well, if they need a new system, they're also going to need some new behavioral training to support that. So you might add in that you've got some experience in this space, or how you did it with another organization in which you put in that piece of technology and you did this, because that gives you an opportunity to sell on an additional part of your expertise. And you can also, if the proposals allow you to add additional services if needed, you can then add that in to say, you know, we can also, or we also partner with. So, you know, and those are the things that you need to be kind of clear. And that's why the network is really important, because sometimes you can bring in someone else who you know can do a component that you can't do. However, you then negotiate whatever percentage with them as to, if we're successful, this is what will happen in that particular space as well. Yeah, we talked about those long sentences, you know, in terms of confusion, you know, having sort of sentences that go on for 4 or 5 lines, no breathing or anything, you know. My son's got his degree and all that sort of stuff, but, you know, sometimes when they write the text and the rest of it, you know, I'm just looking and, oh, he's written something, and I just read it without the punctuation. And he says, Mum, slow down. I said, well, no, you said that punctuation doesn't matter. Not in this day and age, doesn't it? And I said, so I'm just going to read it the same way you said it. And he's like, yeah, important. Make sure you understand, put the right things in. Don't put a semicolon where there needs to be a comma. Especially if someone like me is reading your proposal. So it's just some of those things, you know, they are basics, but they are really important, yeah? See about utilizing different ways of structuring information. So again, we talk about, you know, having little graphics created, you know, so then you can just insert them in because it just kind of clearly articulates what you're trying to, you know, to say in that way. It's just making sure that there are some that it just literally requires you to write text. Unfortunately, I hate those ones. I prefer to throw in a few graphics and things. But if you have got them to the side, you know, and it's relevant and it makes sense, then add them in. Sometimes it's putting things in tabular form, you know, where you can just kind of explain, You know, so you can say maybe it's a specific skill or thing that they're looking for and you're referencing. You might then articulate, you know, a couple of projects within that, because then sometimes that also helps with the word count when you put it into a table, you know, so that doesn't count. So just have a look and see if those do. If they say tables don't count, there's a few more tables than I need in there, trust me. But that's just kind of thinking about those things that you might put in as well. And then, you know, again, as we said, processes, you know, step by step, you might then explain what each step does and what the value of each step does. Or you might have your steps, or in terms of your process, and then take one of your examples and then put each step and what happened in that particular organization or how your team contributed. So if you weren't necessarily involved in the end-to-end, but you can describe how you were involved in kind of, you know, the adoption of a new way of working, that the case may be, but you show it in your process. Again, it kind of shows that you understand what happens across it, but you might have been only involved in a particular component. Yeah. Be specific and give examples where you can. They do want to know that you can do this. And again, you know, it's always daunting when you're doing your very first bid or proposal. When I left Network Rail, I left them with the name of my business and no contract. That was literally what I left with. And I went into the home retail group at the time, and they offered me an interim contract, 5 days a week with, for me, a pretty low day rate. And I said to them, right, I'm prepared to do 3 days a week for you with the same money, or, you know, that you're going to pay me for 5 days based on my experience, because the other 2 days I'm going to be building my consultancy. They said, yeah, fine. So whilst I was working 3 days a week to make sure there was some revenue coming in, whilst I was there were a couple of opportunities that I noted, sourced and got my first 2 associates, got my associates working in there. By the ending of year 1, I had 7 people working within the organization. I had to write my first proposal there. So you can imagine part of that proposal was some of the references were from within the organization, plus some of them were from based on my kind of previous work, etc. So it's just being able to kind of, you know, articulate some of those things. When you need to kind of get specific, so we talked to you about names of team members that you've worked with or are working on projects or have worked on previous projects. So you need to be able to be clear about that. And if you know, the same ones you want to be working on this particular project, you need to be able to kind of say they worked in or delivered X or did what, and this was the benefit to them. This is how much they saved the organization, whatever the case may be. So really add their value. If you've got different partners, so again, when you're putting, so this is kind of just slightly outside of the actual writing of the proposal, but think about when you are selecting a partner to work with you on any of these, make sure that everything is really clear in your contract with your partner, both from a financial perspective, if things change, if there are any issues on the project, who's going to manage the account, if there's any losses, how that's going to be split. All of those things are really important. You can't just say, I've got a partner because I just had a chat with Joe and Joe said, yeah, he will do that for me. Yeah. So just be really clear about that. So for yourself in the background, you've got that working. And then, you know, if you've worked with similar organizations or people, whatever, make sure you articulate those and list them as well. So when you kind of start to look at kind of your feedback on your proposals and things, you know, the classifying or clarifying advice, I thought it was good, but it still needs to change. So what's different? You know, you looked at your proposal and you think, right, okay, so it was quite good. I think it articulated a lot of things in here. However, I can see that the way that we described our process wasn't clear. Or it was a last minute graphic that went in and we now realize it wasn't relevant to the text. That happens quite a lot. I thought it was good and it can stay as it is in the future. So you know that that particular thing you identified or process was the right thing, worked well, and you'll continue to use it. I thought it was bad and I can live with it. It's a kind of a suggestion on there, but how, it's okay, but, the feedback seems to be quite positive on it. However, you might do some movement around it and then some criticism. I thought it was bad and it needs to change. So for sure something you're not going to include within your future things. So just kind of do that as a sense check with yourself as to what's important, what's the right things to keep in, and what you need to kind of do differently. Where are we on time? I'm conscious of time. We're at 5:22. Is everyone okay till 5:30? Yeah. So the money's in the details. We're not always successful in these bid writing, and it can be quite disappointing if we haven't been successful, but we can always learn from it. And we do if you can ask for feedback and they're prepared to, then just take it, because you can always feed that into anything you do in the future. If there are some specific questions, you might ask the question around, was it my team that, that didn't have enough experience? Was it, the process? Was that something that wasn't clear? So if there were some things that you think, right, I just want to understand if this, because I don't want to use that again, or maybe I need to articulate and express more about how, the skills that someone else has got and you didn't articulate that in the right way. So that's important. Ask when the next round of funding will be available. So when is there going to be any other projects that are aware of, that you could be considered for? And, as we say, unsuccessful applications are always a learning opportunity. This is one of the proposal decks that Akil's kind of pulled together. We've all been through this journey, and it can be a really exciting journey to go on. And you all will be successful. So we need to be really positive about this. But if there were anything that I'll tell you to take away from today, is to make sure that, one, you build a robust network around you, whether or not that's through your core permanent staff or whether or not that's through your outsourcing or people who can support you through it. Take the risk. So even if you're not successful with the first bid or that you put forward, doesn't mean you're not going to be successful with the next ones. Make sure you get those feedbacks, and start and just continue to build on those and get as many. If you haven't got any references, even through a permanent or someone that, then try and do a little bit of stuff that you can do sort of pro bono. Get some free, offer a service free to someone in exchange for some reviews. So you might do something in that way, so you're able to deliver that, or maybe do some collaboration with someone in which then you are then able to get somebody who's already on a framework or doing something that's similar to what you need or might require your skill, that then, in exchange, part of your deal might be, am I able to use you as a reference, or use that particular client as a reference site? So there are other ways as well of kind of, sort of navigating and moving that round. Okay, so thank you all for your energy today, and thank you for staying on a little bit longer. Hope you got some value out of today. Lovely to meet you all, and great success in everything else that you do. Thanks, guys.